When we talked about feeling the love within the room, I could feel so much of that from all of you. And it just touches my heart so deeply to see so many faces, people that I love so much. Wind? Is that better? Somewhere in between. And as I was reflecting on feeling that love and seeing all of you, I just started feeling tears welling up. And I thought, oh great, I'm going to stand up here and start bawling. And this gives me such great joy to be able to share with you. I find that when we're not doing what we absolutely love to do, we do get sidetracked. And I know I've been so busy on creating a new website and this and that and sitting in front of my computer, it doesn't quite give you back this type of energy interaction. And so I am just so grateful again to be here. I find that humor is a really lovely way to start things off. It might not necessarily be directly related to the topic today, but I find that humor it's a booster. It boosts our immune system. So therefore, it is appropriate. This is a little piece, a little girl had asked her mother, where did people come from? Her mother answered, God made Adam and Eve, and they had children, and that's how all mankind was made. A couple of days later, she asked her father the same question. The father answered, well, many years ago, there were monkeys, which the human race evolved from. The confused little girl returned to her mother and said, Mommy, how is it possible that you told me that we were created by God, and Daddy said that we came from monkeys? The mother answered, well, dear, it's very simple. I told you about my side of the family, and your father told you about his. So when we hear the word God, God has many names, and it's, as we had already been mentioned, God is within every single one of us. It's in you, and you, and you, and you, and you, and it's within all of us, it's within me. And when we come together in a place of love like this, it just charges that energy right up. And that's the energy that we want to be in when we want to have an experience of healing. So many of us experience traumas, things that we don't plan on happening, things that, I remember at a time in my life when everything seemed to be going well. There was a part of me that was going, oh, I'm done with this part of my life, but I really didn't know where it was going to go from there. And, I just kept going on. I ignored this piece that was calling, but I didn't know what that piece was. God has a way of just taking so much time to, give you that time to get it. And when you don't get it, I've learned that he throws a truck in your path. And this truck actually ran a red light, going full speed, and hit me just as I was going through the intersection, and hit the driver's side of the car. Had I been in the intersection just a little more, I wouldn't be standing here. But I ended up with a massive head injury. I had a tremendous amount of migraines. That was part of my life. And I actually had to relearn how to speak. And it was very difficult. That part of my life, I had a very successful career in the film industry, and that ended. It's like I had no choice. It was over. And not knowing where I was going to move in whatever direction that was going to be, I found that I was really drawn to a spiritual awakening. And reading many copious books, I had just a massive library, and I would open whatever page and see what message there was for me that day. For me to speak, it would have to move out. And I found that the more I surrendered to and not battled and resisted, the more I found my path was presenting itself. And I entered the new seminary, studied comparative religions. My life changed. And I now started my spiritual journey in earnest. When, I don't know if has anyone here ever experienced something like where you think you're on a right path, but something's missing and you don't really know what it is? Or how about, maybe you would really look forward to something and then had disappointment? And maybe you thought everything was right and suddenly you got hit with an illness. And what do you do with that? And so what often happens is we go inward and feeling sorry for ourselves, and we go into victim. But what I've discovered is we have a lot of amazing people, so many of you sitting right here, that just by your presence and by your love offers the opportunity for us to move through these situations and feel the healing within ourselves. It wasn't until I really let go that things shifted. And that's an easy word to say, isn't it? Oh, just let go, just, surrender. Yeah, well, it's just, it takes time, and you battle and resist it until finally you just fall on your knees and you surrender. And in my surrendering to God, I found peace. And I trusted. I went into trust that this too would heal. And here I am as a speaker. I came across this following poem by Sunny Carroll, and it's called Awakening. I wanted to share it with you. It spoke to me, and I'm going to see if it relates for you. There comes a time in your life where you finally get it. When in the midst of all your fears and insanity, you stop dead in your tracks. And somewhere, the voice inside your head cries out, enough. Enough fighting and crying or struggling to hold on. And like a child quietening down after a blind tantrum, your sobs begin to subside. You shudder once or twice. You blink back your tears. And through a mantle of wet lashes, you begin to look at the world from a new perspective. For this is your awakening. A lot of what we experience in terms of allowing ourselves to heal comes from belief, comes from trust, the thoughts that we have. And as a child, I believed I had superpowers because, and you mentioned that in your talk, I listened to it early this morning, Bob. and I remembered thinking, I didn't want to go to school today, so I faked a stomachache. And I was really good at it. So good that I ended up in bed all day with a stomachache. And then I would try to do it a little less severe, but that didn't work either. And I think it was probably because I was feeling guilty that I was lying, and it's a sin to lie. And but the thing that amazes me is when I look at how our belief can impact us. Many years ago, my sister, when she was getting married, and my father at that time was in his mid-60s. A very vibrant, young-looking man. I mean, he was just very handsome. And on that wedding day, and my father had lupus. And I don't know if you're familiar with lupus, but it attacks all the internal organs, and you really go through a lot of pain, you go through a lot of suffering, and he was actually given 5 days to live, and pulled through that. So going forward a couple of years, he was coming to my sister's wedding, and he was actually very sick. He wasn't feeling very well at all. And in between the church and going to the reception, I said to Dad, I'm taking you to the hospital. This isn't looking good. No, I don't want to go into a hospital. He had fear that if he went into the hospital, he'd never come out. And I insisted. And we went into the hospital, and he lay down on his bed, and I swear I was shocked I watched my father morph into what looked like a 90-year-old man. He had given up. He thought he was going to die, and the nurse says, "Okay, name," and I couldn't speak. I knew if I uttered a sound, I would be into tears. And I couldn't believe that this happened right there. How we can create that through our belief. He went through a lot of tests. Everything turned out. He had pleurisy, which was still serious. He actually permanently lost part of his hearing in one of his ears. But as soon as he knew that it wasn't the lupus, he morphed right back again until this lovely looking man stood up, walked outside of the hospital, lit up a cigarette and said, "Okay, let's go." And it was phenomenal. I could not believe that. My father actually has presented me with a lot of opportunities for stories. And I had connected with Greg Braden at one time, and I'm sure many of you know he has written many books, Walking Between the Worlds. He also talks about the lost mode of prayer. And I was privileged to have connected and met with Greg, and was really fascinated with this lost mode of prayer, which is based on thought, emotion, and feeling. And I was hyped up, and it was actually a Unity Church gathering at Crystal Mountain in the States. And my father ended up having pneumonia and was extremely ill. We were all in the hospital. And I looked at Mom, and it just didn't look good. And the doctor approached us and said, "I'm sorry to have to share this with you, but he's not going to make it through the day. And if there's anything that you want to say to him, I would suggest that you say it now." So needless to say, we were pretty distraught, and it was my sister, my mom, and I. We were in his hospital room, and he was connected to all this life support, very drained of energy. He hadn't actually made a sound. He was in a coma for 5 days. And I remember touching his hands, which were icy cold. And then when I went around, his feet were sticking out of his covering, and they felt icy cold as well. And so I stood there, I put my hands on his feet, and I started to send Reiki energy into his feet. And as I was doing that, I remembered what Greg Braden had shared. And when you pray as though your prayer has been answered. You don't pray for wellness, you pray wellness. So I had my hands on his feet, and I had this quirky image that came into my thoughts of all the cells in the bottom of his feet suddenly popped and came to life and gathered musical instruments and started to sing and march up his legs. And as they were marching up his legs, they were gathering any weakened cells and coming together and all together, and they kept marching up his legs. And when I imagined them moving through his body and reaching his lungs, and Mom was sitting by his side holding his hand, when I reached into his lungs, he started to cough. And I could hear my mom going, oh my God, is he okay?" And I imagined all the cells celebrating and vibrating and moving up through his head. And I just imagined he's totally well. Then I started, and it's the way I start adding imagery. Use your imagination, keep adding images. So now I imagined my dad being totally well. So this was in October, or no, it was actually in September. And my parents always went to Hawaii for the month of November. So I imagined Mom and Dad getting off the plane in Hawaii. My dad loved Hawaii. I imagined him with his Bermuda shorts and his candy in his pockets. He'd often go up to people and he'd say, here's one for you. And then he'd look at the person next to you. Oh, don't let her know. And then he'd go, oh, here's one for you too. Like he was just one of these kinds of guys. And I imagined, and he loved Hawaii, and I imagined the sun coming onto his skin. And then I let it go. And that's a big key. Let go of any attachment to the outcome, because I knew that in God's infinite wisdom, whatever was meant to occur for my father would occur. And I remember feeling this incredible, and that's the key too, feeling the joy of that within my body. And I had this big smile on my face, which I'm sure my mom and my sister thought was pretty weird. And my sister had just come back from a lunch break. And so Mom and I went down for a bite to eat. And we were gone maybe a half an hour. And when we came back up to his room, there were these nurses standing outside the door, and something was up, and kind of didn't feel ominous, but we peeked into the room, and there's my dad sitting up in bed, off life support, flirting with the nurses, and said to us, "So where's my coffee?" Now, if that's not a miracle, I mean, it was just incredible. So, miracles do occur. And it's our birthright. And we can allow ourselves to believe, and believe without attachment to the outcome. We have so many different experiences in our life, and sometimes we try to get through them ourselves, and other times we need someone to help. And before I actually studied hypnotherapy, I had a very dear friend of mine who we knew each other. In fact, I was 20 and she was 25, and she would always say to me, "Wait till you get to be as old as I am." She had this whole image of aging, and she had a very, very tough life. She developed MS and was in a wheelchair. It was all she could do to use a walker to get to the car and sit in. At that time, I was still in the film, still had my company in the film industry. And I invited her with one of my trips, and we went to Disneyland and had a lot of fun. You get in front of the lines when you're in a wheelchair, so I was like, we were running around, I was pushing her in the wheelchair, and we just had an amazing time. We went to a little cottage afterwards, and she was having a lot of pain in her legs and asked me if I could do anything and put some energy into her legs to help her. And I said, well, let me try this. And so she was very receptive. So this is the other thing for healing. The person that you're working with also has to be open to receiving the healing. And I think it was Reverend Craig, when he gave his talk, he had talked a little bit about that. And so I started to take her into this regression. And the next thing I knew, she started to talk like a little 5-year-old child. And I was like, whoa, this is amazing, and this is still new to me. And as we worked through some of the trauma, it turns out she had a very abusive stepfather. And at one point, when she was connecting to that, her voice sounded like Linda Blair of The Exorcist. And it was just this pent-up anger that was coming through. And it freaked me out. And I said, no, I'm not alone here. And I keep asking Christ to work with me, and I ask my guides to be with me. And it's not me that's doing the healing, surrendering so that this experience can come through for her. By the end of the session, she had experienced such a tremendous healing and had released so much anger. Some of what I have learned is, not all, there's always exceptions. A lot of with MS is stored anger. And so we talked about it for a bit. We both got into the car and we drove to this little town in Whidbey Island. It's a quaint little seaside town. They have some beautiful ones like that in the US. And we were walking around looking in the shop windows. She grabbed my hand and she went, "Oh my God." And I looked at her and I said, "What?" "I'm walking." We didn't even clue in. We'd known each other for so long. We didn't even clue. We were walking around looking in the shop windows, and she was so excited. She went down to the beach and she was running along the beach, hopping over logs. She'd never been back in a wheelchair after that. So that, to me, also was an incredible miracle. And what is possible? We have our own doubts. And, and it's okay to reach out for help. So many times we try to do it and we go within, and it's okay. in our struggle to have control, as much as I had witnessed all these miracles, I was doing a talk actually at Lake Louise, and then I came and I was staying with my friend Dennis, and I phoned my mother, and I had just spent, at that time I was doing a lot of traveling, I was doing a world tour, everything was in storage, and I didn't have a home at that point, so I actually spent about 10 days with my mom over Thanksgiving, and we had the best Thanksgiving ever. And it was wonderful because my mom can be very trying at times, controlling, but it was just this incredible visit. So I phoned and so to backtrack, just before I left, I had a necklace that I wore on one of my brochures. I'd lost it, and my mom was more upset about it than I was. And so she said, "I'm going to find your necklace." And I said, "Well, okay, fine." I call her, and she said, and she's sharing the story about what happened when I was away. And she said, "Are you ready?" I said, "For what?" She said, "I found your necklace." And I said, "You what?" And she sang it again. "I found your necklace." And I said, "Where'd you find it?" She said, "Well, I went to the mall and all the stores that you went to, and I had your brochure, and I told a little white lie." And she said, and I said, "Oh no, Mom, what did you do?" And she said, "Well, I told them that this necklace was given to you by someone that you really, really loved and held dear, and they passed away. And it was the only thing you had to remember them by." And I said, "You didn't, Mom." She said, "Well, I figured if I guilted them out, then if they had the necklace, they would turn it back in." She says, "I put it in the little angel box. It's on the dresser in my bedroom." And that was it. Those were the last words I had with my mother. I received a call early the next morning, and she had a massive stroke. They kept her alive so that I could catch a flight home. And all the way, I was in such tremendous fear. It was difficult for me to just step back and allow God and allow the possibility of healing. I wanted to use all my tools and anything that I could and use the lost mode of prayer and imagined her healthy and did all those things. And when I saw her, I realized she was brain dead and she would not want to live like that. And I realized I had to let her go. And that too was very difficult. But there are times when we can remember the joy. And I remember the joy she did many of my dolphin retreats with me. So it's the memories. And I know I'm near my end of my talk, so I thought, another good way to end my talk would be to share a little bit of humor, boost your immune system some more. So I actually saw this video of this fellow who shared this story, and he was an 83-year-old man. And I often will watch different speakers from different churches, and he was sharing this story. And he said, "Well, I was in a McDonald's drive-through the other morning, and the person behind me leaned on her horn and started yelling profanities and was really rude because I was taking too long to place my order. So when I got to the first window to pay for the order, I paid for her things as well as my own. The cashier must have told her what I had done, because when we continued to move up to the second window to pick up the order, when I continued to pick up the second order, she leaned out of her window and started waving at me and saying, 'Thank you, thank you.' She was probably embarrassed because I repaid her rudeness with kindness. When I got to the second window and picked up my order, I showed the server both receipts, and I took her food along with my food and left. This meant she had to go back to the end of the line and start all over again. Moral of the story, don't blow your horn at old people, because we've been around for a long time." So, I think we're at this point here. Doug will lead us into a meditation song.
If you want to connect with hearts that care, just breathe. If you want to connect with hearts that care, just breathe. If you want to connect with hearts that care, just breathe.
Thank you. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes now and breathe. Connect with your body. Place your awareness on any part of your body that you would desire to have some healing. And our healing can be physical or emotional. And using your imagination, imagine now that you can walk into the most beautiful forest. Perhaps it's a beach. Perhaps wherever is your favorite place to be that's out in nature. For nature is God made visible. You are surrounded by this incredible beauty and peace. Perhaps bring your awareness to someone that you know that is going through turmoil or needs a physical or emotional healing. And now imagine this person and remember all the times and experiences you've had with them when they were well, when they were in joy, when life was filled with laughter. Imagine them now in that state of mind. Imagine them whole, imagine them well. Imagine them doing something that they absolutely, absolutely love to do. And keep imagining that. Imagine that experience. Imagine it and allow that feeling of that to come in through your body. See if you can feel that. Just pump up that joy. Imagine that you've just received a download of information coming through your body, guiding you, what you might be able to say or do to be in service for this friend, this individual. And that you are filled with the knowing that without a doubt that this person will be well again. That for whatever reason that they're experiencing this turmoil in their life, that perhaps the right individual or circumstance will present itself so that they too may be aware and allow for that healing energy to come through. And as you celebrate this healing, trust and know that the infinite wisdom of the Creator will know what is right for this entire experience. So while still pondering and imagining these experiences and images and the feeling sensations you may now have, I encourage you to hold fast to your belief that this will succeed. When you choose to believe all things are possible, the abundant and plentiful universe, our divine creator, beloved God, responds in kind. So be it, and so it is.